Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. On this big picture, I'm going to have a conversation about the world that we live in, mostly politically. My guest is Mickey Kearns, who is the Erie County Clerk, but today we're talking about just politics. So not the clerk's office as much, but let's talk about what's going on in the world today. Yeah. Politically, we've had a real transition with Trump becoming president. There's things that are concerned with New York State. The Business Council of New York State, this is the first thing I'll bring up. They published a report in the late fall that said that in the last 3 years, New York State has lost almost $1 trillion in assets and value to other states. What does that say about the leadership in the way the state is being run?
It's a lot there, Phil, that you're asking me, but I'll try to boil it down. Yes, we have a new president, President Trump. He's the first president to do this since one of my favorite presidents that a lot of people don't know about, Grover Cleveland, who said, what's the use of being elected or reelected if you don't stand for something? Grover Cleveland was a very honest person. He really ascended into the presidency from Erie County. At the office I'm in now, he was the mayor. He was upstairs before City Hall was built, at Niagara Square. Then he became the sheriff. He's the last sheriff to have public hangings. Then he became the governor of the state of New York. The most vetoes out of any governor. A lot of corruption. Tammany Hall. I was down in Albany myself, and I saw a lot of what could happen. And the problem is, if you don't have strong leadership, these things get bigger and bigger and bigger. And believe me, I sat in those chambers, and when you're spending other people's money, it's easy. But Phil, we're having a tough time. I mean, I think what resonated for President Trump is America first. But what does America first really mean? What it means is putting our citizens before other countries, our sovereignty before other countries. And we may disagree on policies, but we have to be united as a country because we have to go forward. And part of that is financially. And, what do the states depend upon? The states depend upon the federal government for funding, right? Medicaid. And, I've seen that in Albany, the reckless spending, the oversized borrowing in our lending of our budgets. We are in a tough circumstance in New York State because we're almost like two states in one. We've got New York City, which has a large population that has a very specific agenda. And then you have upstate New York, a lot of those counties that are a little bit more conservative. And we would see that in Albany where, a lot of the legislation that got passed, they would have to put that $1 million amount because every piece of legislation is supposed to have a financial impact. And, the politics of what is going on today, I think people want to see a change. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, you're unaffiliated. They got sick of the previous leadership and where we were going, and they got a new person in. And President Trump is the first president to be elected in non-consecutive terms since Grover Cleveland. The people put him there.
We'll get into a little bit more about Trump and the way some of the Democrat loyal areas switched and voted for a Republican. But right now, you brought up the fact that New York City is kind of separate from the rest of the state. And because of the population, New York City really is like, the 800-pound gorilla, that kind of controls everything else. We all know that. We all know that New York City is more liberal than the rest of the state. One thing I've never heard anybody really talk about is why that area leans so much to the left, where the rest of the state is a little more conservative. And it has to do with large populations to a great degree, because I was in California for 20 years, and they have a similar situation most of the state is conservative, but Los Angeles and San Francisco kind of outweigh everything else. The entire state is controlled by those two areas because of the population and the way the population leans. What makes New York City a liberal area?
It always hasn't been, and I think this whole thing with Trump is just at the beginning. We don't know what's going to happen, but here's what we know. We can go and we can look back at history. We did have a Republican governor, and Governor Pataki. We had Rockefeller, who was a very, I believe a good governor. He was very proactive on the disabled. I think what's going to happen is there's two things that people care about, especially at their local government. Number one, they care about safety. New York City's not safe anymore. I used to take my family there, my first daughter. We would go there all the time. It was awesome to go see the Statue of Liberty, to walk around. New York City is not safe anymore. Everybody knows that. There is a massive flood of police officers looking to retire. What did Giuliani do when he was the mayor of New York City? They had a strong police force. They had police officers on every corner. The broken window theory, where, rundown areas of New York, places where, there was pornography and other things, they cleaned them up. And families felt safe. What does that do? That's good, for tourism. People come in to see shows if they feel safe. That's number one, safety. This is what will change New York City. Number two, and this is why the current mayor, Mayor Adams, is the mayor. He was a former police officer. Number two is their pocketbook. And if people, at some point in time, there's only so much money in their budget. And we saw that with inflation federally. But if you see that, they can only afford to spend so much money. They can't travel.
One of the reasons that Trump won like he did was because for the last generation, really, something called common sense has kind of taken a back seat to social orders.
Right.
And in the last 3 or 4 years, that war on common sense was accelerated. And whether it's women having to compete in their sports with men, or having men come into their locker room,
it's terrible.
Or whether it's, inflation. Now, inflation, the Fed raises interest rates to get people to stop spending money and cool down the economy, but that's not what caused inflation. You and I weren't spending like drunken sailors to cause inflation. What caused inflation is $5 trillion invented, just created out of nothing and put into the money system. When you add money to the system with no additional values or services, that's inflation. Because, just for the sake of argument, say there's $10 trillion circulating in the US. If you add $5 trillion out of thin air, suddenly that $10 trillion has lost almost a third of its value because of the way money, now you have all that extra money chasing goods and services that haven't increased. That's inflation. Inflation was caused by government spending. It wasn't caused by you and I spending. And so it's common sense that isn't taught in schools anymore, unfortunately, and seems to be taking a back seat in society. But now Trump he campaigned on common sense, whether it's gender, whether it's inflation, whether it's crime, whether it's immigration and the border. He talked about common sense. How does this make sense and how does this not make sense? I think he got through to people on that.
Phil, people don't understand. If I went into high school, the president doesn't even make the monetary policy for the United States. It's something called the Federal Reserve. And people don't understand what the Federal Reserve is. It is, if you go and you look back until at least the 80s, the Federal Reserve was a very conservative organization. They didn't lend a lot of money. But what happened? Under Obama, when he came in, there was a huge deficit. We were going to go into a depression. That is a fact. And the one thing I got to give Obama credit for, when I think he did a good job, that we've sort of lost, sight of, is when he lent money to the big corporations that were too big to fail, it was a loan. It wasn't a grant. We shouldn't be giving government money to these corporations. And the big bonuses that came from that. So that was number one. And the Federal Reserve has become the piggy bank for the federal government. A lot of people don't understand. They've heard of Fort Knox, that we used to be on something called the gold standard. What did that mean? You learned that in school. The gold standard was every dollar that we created, there was gold that would back that up. That's why we have the strongest currency in the United States, in the world, I'm sorry. The gold standard has made it so, what is the universal dollar, the strongest dollar in the United States, which China's trying to come at us with, is the dollar, the US dollar. Why is that? Whether you're buying bonds, whether you're doing that, the gold standard. We got off the gold, Nixon got us off the gold standard, and people don't even understand what the Federal Reserve is. They started just printing money, like a printing machine. And that caused inflation, because when you have lots of money going into the economy, it drives up the price. So yes, we have a problem. We gave $200 billion to Ukraine, whether you're for or against the war. We can't even get our roads paved here, but we're giving money to all these corporations. People figured it out. When they go into the store, and eggs used to be $1.39, now they're $3. Gas used to be, $2.79, now it's $3.50. Well, over a budget, all of a sudden you want to go out with your wife or your husband, and you say, let's go out to dinner, let's take a vacation. And whoever's doing the books in the house, the kitchen table issues, they look at the other couple and says, we can't afford it. Yeah, right. What do you mean? We've always gone on vacation once a year. Yeah. Phil, we have to start putting our country first. We have to get our finances in order. And that's what we do in a little way at the county clerk's office. Is government has gotten too big. We got to bring it down. And I'm a registered Democrat, and I believe that. Because in the end, government's gotten too big, whether it's Albany, whether it's the federal government, or whether it's locally.
You put your finger on it when you said earlier that spending other people's money is easy.
Yes.
And it's addictive, because you get something out of spending somebody else's money. You get favors back from the people you're serving, and votes, because you're giving stuff away.
Right.
And it's an easy thing to do for an elected official, because there's no reins, that you can't rein that in. People see something they can make a decision on, and it's like, it's not going to affect me, except it's going to get me votes. It's going to get me more constituents saying thank you. But who pays the bill? Anyway, we're out of time on this segment. We're going to come back shortly. You put something in my mind about the Federal Reserve, and I'm going to do a whole show on that in the future.
I'd love to come in and talk about it.
We'll talk about this after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Big Picture. My guest is Mickey Kearns, Erie County Clerk, and we're talking basically the world of politics and what's going on in this country, inflation and various common sense things that seem to have taken hold since Trump was elected. And perhaps Trump was elected because he campaigned on common sense. Even New York State, he gained support amongst areas that normally only vote Democrat. And he didn't win the state, but he did better than any recent Republican who was running. Talk to me about whether or not that's a sign in the future that people are going to think a little bit more about the realities of what's good for the country and what's good for them, as opposed to just listening to rhetoric?
I think with the advent of the internet, people are smarter. Voters are always smarter. But I'm a registered Democrat. I've run on the Republican line. I think people want the best candidate, who they feel as though is the best. And I think what you're going to see in the future is, we'll bring it down to the local level. We'll take Erie County. You know, the parties have a lot of influence, obviously. It's hard for people like myself who are independently elected. I'm probably almost extinct among elected officials, where I can go out, can do my own thing. But what you're going to see is the non-affiliation of people to a party. Mm-hmm. And that's a fact. We now know that, 25% of Erie County voters, they don't belong to a party. Why is that? I think in the old days, when people were more reliant on the parties, maybe for jobs and for other things, maybe their parents were the parents of FDR, the big government, which there are a lot of good things that came from FDR. The WPA, the former Memorial Auditorium, bridges. Listen, we got to get people to work, right? So a lot of good things happened. But I think the younger generation, they're more independent. There's more entrepreneurs today using technology than at any other time. They don't need government for a job or for a favor. And I think they're being more idealistic from the standpoint of, look, government has not been the most honest entity for a long time. If you look back in history, we'll look at Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin. We weren't shot upon. The assassination of President Kennedy, I know President Trump is going to be releasing assassination documents on President Kennedy, his brother, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, and our great Martin Luther King, one of my favorite people. Procrastination is the thief of time, Martin Luther King. I love Martin Luther King. Always standing up for the little guy. And I think they read that. Access on the internet is there, and they're not so reliant upon the newspapers or media to tell us what we should know and not know. We can make our own decisions.
The media doesn't have that monopoly anymore.
Right.
And if you look at ABC, NBC, CBS, their influence, because they were the only game in town giving you information, their influence has just tanked. I mean, people, especially within the last few years, people are tuning out to the journalists, so-called, in the mainstream media. And maybe that's because Trump makes such fun of them and gets into these contests with them. Or maybe it just makes sense because what they hear from the media doesn't mesh with what they're seeing at the gas pump and at the supermarket. They're being lied to a great extent. Journalism has died in this country, and I'm ashamed. Most of my adult life has been in TV news, and to look at what has happened to the business, it's a shame, and the country cannot survive without a good source of information. Hopefully, the internet provides that. And you yourself, you started out as a Democrat, and you, I believe, went to the Republican side to run.
Yep.
And so you've seen both sides, and you're very independent. Right. That brings a little bit of a problem when it comes to party officials attacking you because they can't control you.
Correct.
The public loves that, but the party leaders, the people in charge, they pull out all the stops to take away your credibility, to cast aspersions on you, to doing whatever they can so that they can put somebody into office wherever you're going to run so that they can control this person. Because they can't control you, and that makes you a target.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is the federal government. All of our governments have been lying to us for such a long time. And as you stated, we now have citizen reporters. Before I know you were a cameraman, I can go out, I can be my own citizen reporter. I can do my own video. I think one of the things we're seeing, me personally, I'm very grateful, starting my days from Canisius College, now Canisius University, if you would have told me I would have had the career I have had, I'm very happy I was a council member. But we made a lot of changes to help people. I went to Albany, I fought corruption, I fought Sheldon Silver. Bad guy, bad guy. I said that to a lot of my colleagues. You know, they didn't agree with me until they took him out in handcuffs. Locally, you know, I wanted to run for office to help people who were facing many financial issues, foreclosure, bring better services to the DMV. Nobody thought it could be done. Nobody thought it could be done. That's my Super Bowl. When someone comes in and they walk in and they get good service, pleasant, you know, interaction with a staff member, they made an appointment, they walk out and said, oh my gosh, I normally spend an hour at the DMV. I was out in 10 or 15 minutes. But Phil, telling the truth is the most important thing. And we've lost that, and I think people don't trust the government anymore. They don't feel like the government's on their side anymore.
How do we get that back, though?
You got to put better people in office. We need better people to run for office.
It's kind of a catch-22, though, because the people in office and the party leaders typically control who runs and what they say.
Don't give them so much credit. They're not that smart. I keep on beating them.
Smart. I said they control things.
But listen, Jimmy Griffin said it. You could have some shoe leather. Listen, you got to have some initiative. This is tough work. I say this to my daughter all the time. All these things, you know, I could be a salesman. I could have a nice job. I could have sold insurance. You know, it's tough fighting people every day and advocating for people. I am so upset with the NFTA, a public benefit corporation, the way they treat our disabled community. They won't expand. I had a bill to expand paratransit service. You know, the disabled community, you talk about Rockefeller, one of our best governors for the disabled community, built the group homes, built, you know, the places like for my brother. But right now, the NFTA is sitting on a cash cow. They won't hire more bus drivers. They treat them like garbage. And the NFTA is sitting on a pot of money. And there are poor people in wheelchairs that want to be part of our community. You know, it's the first time in our community where there are jobs looking for people instead of people looking for jobs. Shame on you, NFTA. And I'm going to say it right to the screen. Shame on you, Kim Minkle. Anytime you want to talk to me, I'll talk to you. I'm sick of it. Do something for the disabled. I'm sick of it. And you know what, Phil? They're sitting on a lot of money.
One thing that most people don't know is, what is the NFTA?
It's a public benefit corporation. You know what it's controlled? It's controlled by politicians. It's controlled by a board that needs to wake up, NFTA. I got a very insulting letter from the president of the board. Shame on you, Mike. Shame on you. Known you for a long time. And I don't care if he sees this. I'll tell you right now, $150 million they're sitting on, and to expand paratransit service is $5 million. It's garbage like that that people are sick of. And I encourage people out there to write your legislator, write your state official, because you know what about a public benefit corporation? It was created by the legislature. God forbid I ever go back. I don't know in what capacity, but my first bill is going to be to get rid of the NFTA.
Well, you know, that's the subject for a whole program, because
a whole program. I need 3 programs on that.
The NFTA, not only do they control, like, you know, buses and the transit, they control the airport. And I can tell you, as a pilot,
right,
Buffalo Airport is a great airport. It's a tremendous facility, but they don't let anybody in who's a small airplane owner. Mm-hmm. They don't build hangars. They don't let private aircraft in. There's only one fixed base operator. It used to be Prior, and now and NOCO owned it, I think. I'm not sure who owns it now. But they won't let any smaller operations in. It's a tremendous airport that's underutilized, just the airlines. And this area has a lot of pilots that could use good facilities in
right.
Buffalo Airport. And that's the NFTA. Plus, they sit on a huge amount of land on our waterfront. I think a lot of that land is owned by the NFTA.
It was transferred to the state, which I think the state actually is doing a pretty good job. It was transferred to the state. But here's the thing. So here's the entity where you have the NFTA. They control the bus services. Then the airport, as you stated. And they had other obligations. And my whole point is that big bus and light rail, my whole point is that you ask me why people get upset with government. When you have a disabled young lady, Stephanie Speaker, waiting with her father for an hour to get picked up out in the cold, he's a Purple Heart veteran, that boils my blood. And, you know, Kim Minkle, who's the president and CEO of the NFTA, makes $350,000 a year. She makes more than the president of the United States. So look at it. This is why I'm not popular. And you told me, like, why do I like government? Why do I like Martin Luther King? Martin Luther King was out fighting for the bus drivers, making sure that they had a fair wage.
He had a great amount of common sense.
He had a great amount of common sense, and he pulled people with him. I know at the time it was tough.
Well,
but, you know, NFTA, we can come in. Matter of fact, I would love to debate anyone from the NFTA. And anytime, I'd love to come in. But here's the thing, Phil. We give the NFTA from mortgage tax from the county clerk's office, we gave them in surplus in the past 6 or 7 years, $46 million. The county controller or the state controller should be auditing them. Where'd that money go? You talk about where money goes, all that money adds up.
Well, that's the subject for another show. We are out of time for this show. It's been a very interesting conversation, and it leads to subjects that I'm going to do another show on the Federal Reserve. I'm going to do another show on NFTA. Hopefully, Mickey will come back and talk about it. And hopefully, you will tune in. The Big Picture is a program you won't see anywhere else on TV in Buffalo. Thank you for watching The Big Picture. Thank you for watching WBBZ-TV, because we are your local station and we depend on you. We'll see you next time on The Big Picture.